Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Costain. Scotland's climate is changing faster than scientists predicted, with an increasing likelihood of more frequent and more extreme weather events, according to new analysis by the James Hutton Institute. I spoke to Dr Mike Rivington, who led the research for the Scottish Government at the James Hutton Institute, and asked him to outline the key findings from the report.
Well, the main thing, was that what we've found was that climate change has already happened, and to some considerable amount, particularly winter rainfall. Winter rainfall from sort of December, January, February has already increased more than what climate projections were forecasting out to 2050. And that was quite a surprise. We knew that some changes had happened, but actually seeing it in sort of graphical form was quite a surprise. But the other thing was that we found that particularly February temperatures have already increased in the order of about 2 degrees, which puts them at the sort of bottom end of what the climate projections were showing for 2050. So really what it tells me is that what we've already experienced is pretty much on track, even a bit faster than what some of the climate projections have been forecasting through to sort of mid-century.
It almost sounds as though climate change is accelerating faster than expected if we're already starting to see low-end 2050 projections reached today in 2024.
Yeah, it's difficult to know whether climate change is accelerating faster than expected. From climate science, we've known for decades that it will accelerate, but at what rate is difficult to tell. I think our analysis sort of confirms that yes, it is happening and happening fairly quickly. Whether it will continue to accelerate, that will depend on what we manage to do in terms of reducing our use of fossil fuels, etc., and how we adapt to a new form of economy where we use less resources. But in terms of the evidence that we've got from our analysis, yes, it's showing that particularly with precipitation, it has accelerated probably more than we were expecting. From the climate science perspective, we always knew that there was going to be large amounts of variability in the future climate, and that's another sort of key finding from our work, is that variability is increasing. So the fact that we might have some springs in the future, which are actually really good for agriculture for a whole range of different land uses, is a potential benefit. But then conversely, in other years, we may have particularly dry springs, which obviously will cause a lot of problems in terms of crop establishment and crop growth. So it's coping with that sort of mixed bag of responses and that increasing variability that our analysis has shown and is likely to continue in the future.
Now, the research was commissioned by the Scottish Government. How do you expect the information to be used?
Well, I know already that it's been passed through various different departments within the Scottish Government and that they're taking it seriously. They have taken a look at the whole issue to do with the peatland restoration work and the ability to re-wet peatlands to keep carbon in the soils. They are looking at it in terms of potential need for increasing resilience in the agricultural support schemes for farmers, so that resilience becomes an essential part of how farmers are supported in terms of payment schemes. So I think across the board, they're also looking at issues to do with transport infrastructure, health. So I think the information has been taken on board and is being used across a range of different departments within Scottish Government.
There must be quite a challenge for policymakers in terms of trying to work out how to deal with trend changes, for example, what might happen to a peat landscape over time, and then dealing with the variability of the weather. So you have a good year or a bad year. And of course, this year has been very bad in terms of flooding.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be a real problem, not just for Scottish Government, for governments all around the world, really, is just how do they develop policies that can help mitigate climate change by reducing our use of fossil fuels, etc., but also adapting to a range of different climate impacts. For example, the impacts on the food system in the UK may be actually due to climate change impacts in other parts of the world, and we've seen that in the past. So that can lead to, say, breadbasket reductions, just a relatively small amount, but that has a price spike in the cost of food, and that will have repercussions on farm level sort of management decisions about how best to sort of grow crops and what resources to use. So Scotland can't be seen in isolation in terms of what the climate change impacts are here, but in terms of how the Scottish government can respond to that variability, yes, I think it is a really, really big challenge of how you can develop approaches and policies and economies that are able to cope with that increasing variability and volatility because of impacts elsewhere in the world.
If land managers are looking at your report and seeking guidance, what are the particular issues that you think that farmers should be aware of and indeed adapt for?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is the excess winter rainfall, and I think we've sort of seen that due to Storm Babette and subsequent storms in some areas, Angus areas, seriously flooded agricultural land soils at saturation point for long periods of time. So it's coping with the excess of water over the winter, and then conversely, and through the spring and through the summer, it's potentially the shortage or the scarcity of water. And as I said before, we might have some years in the future where we have really good growing conditions, bumper harvest. That is a distinct possibility. But conversely, we may also have more extreme weather events that can cause a lot of problems and potential reductions in crop yield due to water scarcity at the wrong time of growth. So in terms of farmers then sort of trying to build resilience, it's how they might manage their soils to try and retain water in the soils as best they can. So it's going to be a bit of a balancing act between making sure that soils aren't saturated for too long, but at the same time maintaining that water in the soils for as long as possible in case there are drought occurrences. So looking at how they will manage water within farms, I think it's going to be one of the key issues in the next couple of decades.
Now, nature-based carbon storage is a key tactic for emissions reduction. How should land managers reflect on the issues raised in your report in order to maximise the longevity of land-based carbon storage?
Our report shows that water availability will be a key consideration in the future, and in respect of peatlands and peatland restoration to try and keep carbon in the soils rather than it becoming carbon dioxide release due to degradation. Re-wetting is how we approach peatland restoration, so making sure there's water available. For the western areas of Scotland, I really don't think that's going to be a particular issue for most years in the future, but central and eastern areas of Scotland in the future may experience increased water scarcity, particularly in the spring and the summer, and that's due to reduced precipitation, but also increased evapotranspiration, where water will leave surfaces. Some areas of the uplands in the east may have some water scarcity, which will make peatland restoration a bit more challenging. But when we come down to the more lowland areas, I think one of the things that farmers can look to do is increasing the amount of organic matter in the soils, because that helps with water retention, and that will give some resilience to periods when the water is scarce.
Now, as you mentioned, the report focuses on peatland carbon storage, but of course treescapes are also vulnerable to water variability and to disease migration.
I think the whole issue with climate change raises a lot of these sort of questions, and there are still quite a few sort of unknowns as to what the consequences will be in terms of the risks to, say, forestry or agroforestry. I think one of the concerns is the increased level of storms and the intensity of storms and high winds. We saw with Storm Arwen the damage that did, and those sort of storms are going to become more likely. Likewise, in changes in the sort of microclimates within forested areas may facilitate increased pests activities. And I think there is a lot of concern in terms of overall plant health due to invasive pests, and trying to identify where they might start to occur in the country. And I think those issues are going to become more and more serious as time goes by. Our report specifically looked at issues to do with the climate itself, and then we made some interpretations of what that means. So I think from our report, we can look through it and start to identify where there may be sort of areas of greater vulnerability. And I think, again, for forestry, wind is obviously a big issue. And I think that then relates to the wider issues of land use management, of identifying where particular activities are best suited. And one of the concerns is establishment of trees on soils that are already high in carbon, and that they actually may be better placed in areas of lower carbon, but they tend to also sometimes be shallower soils. So it's trying to match the requirements for multiple objectives, for example, carbon sequestration through tree planting, with what the soils and the soil water and what the capabilities are, and then integrating that with a mix of all the other things we're expecting to use land for. So I think in the future, well, as from now, we've got some really interesting challenges about how we achieve those sort of multiple objectives from land use. But certainly climate change itself is adding an additional level of complexity to it because of the additional risks, be it from increased winds or reduced water availability or prevalence of pests and diseases.
That was Dr Mike Rivington from the James Hutton Institute. More news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.